Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Eyeopener Report. I'm your host, as always, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, here in the sunny climes of Western Japan, where the cicadas are chirping and it is too hot to close my window. And today we are joined once again by the founder and editor of BoilingFrogsPost.com, none other than Sibel Edmonds, recently returned from a trip to the Middle East. And we are going to be talking today on a subject that we covered back in January. We had a conversation talking about the CIA's reverse engineering of the downfall of Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan, and the Turkish elections are just around the corner, coming up on August 10th, so we are seeing some moves once again in the political arena there in Turkey, and here to break it down for us is Sibel Edmonds. Sibel, as always, thank you so much for joining us today on the program.
Thank you, James, for the opportunity.
Well, it's good to pick your brain on this, because I'm sure this is one of those issues that has fallen under the radar of a lot of people, as there's so much going on the world stage right now. But I think it is important what's happening in Turkey right now. There are some very interesting moves and maneuvers that are happening in Turkish politics, and you have pointed this out to me in an email exchange that we had and some articles that you wanted to go over. So why don't we start talking about the issues, not necessarily the domestic issues surrounding this Turkish political election, but the issues specifically that Erdogan has been pushing in recent years that is part of that engineered downfall that we were talking about earlier in the year. And I guess the way to approach this is to start talking about Erdogan's enemies, because as we talked about in a previous conversation about who's at the top of the pyramid, there are, of course, certain industries and certain players who do tend to control political associations, political groupings in pretty much every Western developed nation. And, of course, Turkey, not really any different. But Erdogan has been making some pretty dramatic moves to piss off some very powerful and important people in recent years. Why don't we start talking about some of those maneuvers? And I don't know where you want to begin, but let's start perhaps with talking about the pharmaceutical industry in Turkey and what Erdogan has been doing to block that.
Yes, James. And I want to also, as a side note, actually maybe not a side note, but a main note, to say that the enemies that we are going to talk about happen to be the enemies you and I have been covering a lot through Boiling Frogs Post and Corbett Report, in terms of the big pharma and the lobbies and the military-industrial complex, etc. And it is absolutely international, because we know the biggest of the biggest are the ones that are here in the Western world, especially in the United States. But I traveled extensively and I interviewed many people during my travel, and Turkish people, and from all walks of life, from doctors and teachers to construction workers and taxi drivers and truck drivers and textile moguls. And I spoke to, I would say, several dozens of people, Turkish people, each with their own perspective, each with their own point of view, some of them pro Prime Minister Erdogan, some of them anti or strongly anti Prime Minister Erdogan. And I also learned about certain things that I did not know. I thought I was informed on all issues Turkey, but I guess my main focus, or our main focus, was mainly on the CIA, the stuff that has to do with Gulen, a little bit with the SEO, and also the military-industrial complex and his fallout with the moguls of the military-industrial complex. But there were areas that I didn't know anything about, and I began finding out, and I was surprised. I was actually stronger than surprised. I was shocked. I was discussing with some doctors, Turkish doctors, about the medical and the health industry in the United States and the healthcare and how it is. And the conversation came to this incestuous relationship between the doctors, whom you're supposed to be trusting, and the big pharma and the kickbacks, that they have strong lobbies with millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars poured into lobby the big pharmas, but also all the kickback, and which are all bribery, payoff to the doctors to prescribe their medication more, and as a result get commission various ways. The trips that are sponsored by the big pharma on their conferences, and then they started telling me about how the kickbacks and the lobby was or used to be even stronger and more overt in Turkey. They said, for example, not only that they offered us, those of us who prescribe lots of medication for a particular company, such as Pfizer's, Merck, etc., such as conferences, vacations in Maui, etc., but they overtly sponsored children of the doctors, Turkish doctors, who prescribe certain medication a lot, above certain percentage or certain number. Their kids were placed by these big U.S. pharmas into top Ivy League schools in the United States. And they would guarantee it, saying, if you go above this, you get this kickback. And if you prescribe to this level, then we guarantee that we can place your son at Georgetown University or in Harvard. And we have a deal. This is what the pharma, these big U.S. pharmas, been telling these Turkish doctors, that we'll place your kid in these schools because we have an arrangement. So this actually involves this private education institutions here in the United States as well. I was flabbergasted. However, they told me that, well, those days ended because, as you know, Prime Minister Erdogan put a stop to that and basically illegalized it. And right away, my radars went up. I said, what do you mean? When did this happen? They said, oh, a few years back, a couple of years ago. He said this was absolutely a wrong practice, and I'm going to propose this bill and pass it, and we're going to make it illegal. Because that kind of a relationship between the doctors and the pharmaceutical, the big pharma, is absolutely detrimental for the public's health and well-being. I mean, this is against the public, good. And so therefore, they told me he single-handedly put this law in effect immediately and put an end absolutely to these kickbacks from the big pharmas. Not only that, he also went further. And he said it's also illegal for these pharmaceutical companies, the big pharma, to come and hand out bags and bags. I'm talking about tens or hundreds of kilograms of sample medicine. A lot of these medications, they're on the trial stage, but because the human lives are more valuable in nations like maybe UK and US, maybe much less valuable in Turkey, and of no value at all in countries, third world countries in Africa, the pharmaceutical big pharma, they do that a lot. It hasn't gotten through any of these testing period, but they hand them, this is good for AIDS, this is good for depression. We are giving it to you free. The only thing we are requesting you doctors is to report back to us. How many of your patients died, taking this, or how many of them collapsed? So you become our guinea pigs, because that's what they are, right? We have divided the world, those who rule, those who are being ruled, and the values assigned to various lives, Palestinians versus the Israelis. Well, the similar concept. Well, Prime Minister Erdogan illegalized and said they are not allowed to walk in and hand out these samples. Because again, this practice is wrong. I can't imagine anyone who would disagree, except the big pharma and their lobby, with this unbelievable law. Not only that, I have been researching, I have been talking to other people around Europe where I traveled. Nobody can think of any president or a prime minister, in the recent modern history who has stood up and taken a position like this against the big pharma, and we know how criminal they are, how dirty they are, these people, and go beyond talk. We have had some politicians who have made some gestures in words saying, oh, this is something that needs to come under certain types of regulation. Maybe we'll think about it after I get elected, hopefully we'll forget about it. We have never had any world leader in the Western world who has had the guts to stand up to the big pharma. You're looking at trillion-dollar industry, okay? Military industrial complex, then you have the big pharma, and you have the financial institutions, and then you have the oil sector. The four top biggest sections of the top corporations. And to put in effect a law like this, execute it and stick with it. It's amazing. And guess what? I also started researching it to see how many English articles have been written in the United States, in the United Kingdom, because a lot of articles, as we know, as we talked about, James, have been written on Erdogan, how bad he is, how awful Erdogan is, how he has been violating human rights, freedom, democracy, how he's a dictator, and covering even his personal life. We have not had a single article written by the New York Times or Washington Post or The Guardian how Erdogan, the only known prime minister in the modern history, has stood up against this big, nasty, dirty pharma and put in place a law like this. And I'm thinking, imagine if the public in the US or in UK or in Germany were to read about these articles, okay, especially the ones who are brain dead, the majority, who don't have the critical thinking ability, and say, yeah, you know what? Think of it. That is a horrible practice. They get kickback from pharma to prescribe because they're making profit out of that. Therefore, how can I trust my doctor? Why in the world our presidents, whether it's Obama or Bush or the ones before that, Clinton, why nobody has ever done such a thing? It's very simple, the notion. It's very clearly a right thing to do for the public's good, for the public's right, for their benefit. How come we've never had a single politician in the history of this country who has had the kahunas, excuse my language, to stand up to the big pharma and say, this is what I'm going to do? Not like those miggy stuff. I'm going to do it. I'm going to put in effect. We're going to pass it, because I can't imagine anybody in Congress who's elected who can say this is a bad law. Can you imagine anyone having the audacity to stand up and oppose a law like this or a regulation like this? But how come it hasn't been done? That would invoke critical thinking. I believe Western media covering this brave act would start some sorts of revolutions within the Western world, saying this should be the case, this should be the standards, this should be the norm, because the current system we have is incestuous, it's despicable, okay? Well, nobody has written anything about it. And as you can imagine, Prime Minister Erdogan has created some ginormous enemies. You have these top pharmaceutical companies in the world declaring a war against them. How? By their sponsorships in newspapers like the New York Times and Washington Post, okay? By their own NGOs, the ones that they create, put under themselves, they fund to write and criticize, saying how awful he is. They have declared a war against them. They have even gone further. They are saying we are boycotting Turkey and we're not going to send some of our more popular medicine. So that way, some people in Turkey would say, well, I want particular brand of medication. They go to pharmacies and the pharmacist says, they are not sending us anymore because currently they are pissed with our leader. And because of that, they want to artificially create some sort of an outrage among certain percentage of Turkish people to say, this is not right. I can't get the brand, but it hasn't been successful. As far as the public is concerned, people have been cheering. Some of the doctors, they are cheering that I spoke with. I had a few doctors who said, well, actually, this is pretty good, but I believe, or we believe, he's going too far. I said, what do you mean? He's like, well, it's good to maybe cut back and put a percentage and say, well, they cannot give you kickback above certain dollar number or above certain trips, or maybe they can give you this many samples, but not a lot. But he's being radical, man. He's going all the way to such an extreme, and you know, extreme is not good. And I believe some of those doctors used to be the beneficiaries of these really highly troubling practice that has become a norm here and abroad of the kickback. So that's one thing that was surprising, and I found out, and I felt like I wanted to stand up and cheer for anyone who has the courage, who has the interest of its people, is, the nation, the world's people in mind to say, I'm going to do this. And again, as I said, I don't know of any world leader who has done this. And this, in my book, if we have columns, negative, positive, puts one of the top highest level positive for Prime Minister Erdogan, something that should be absolutely applauded, not by only Turkish people, by people around the world. So that was one, and that was the pharmaceutical. And then I spoke with some people within the financial sectors in Turkey, whether they are businessmen or they are working with some of the big to medium-sized financial institutions, talking about how Prime Minister Erdogan has created some big enemies within the financial institutions, especially those mega ones, a lot of them being the, U.S. American financial institutions. That was something, again, I didn't know anything about, because we focused on the Turkey's foreign policy and practices. We were the first ones to criticize Prime Minister Erdogan, James, with his move in backing U.S. with Syria and having the training camps in Turkey, long before anybody reported in the U.S. Western media that they were secretly training people against Assad. And we criticized him. We actually made big enemies within the government insiders in Turkey by doing that. So yes, we have been talking about negatives, but let's talk about some of the positives that you will not see anywhere in the mainstream media. Well, I didn't know anything about this financial moves by the Prime Minister of Turkey that has created this big enemies within the financial sector. Well, I was told that there are these institutions, banking institution called Islamic Bank. Okay, I'm not very familiar with them. So broadly speaking, generally speaking, the Islamic banking, because Islam as a religion absolutely forbids interest. Okay. If you have millions of dollars, whatever money, you can't put it in the bank and receive interest, because the money earned, interest, is considered dirty money that is made off of the hard work or the blood of other people, etc. So there is that notion, principle. I'm not really getting into details because it's one of the things I need to research more, because I'm not sure how some of these institutions, the Islamic banks, operate. And also, going and getting money from the bank and paying bank interest money is also forbidden. The notion of interest is forbidden in Islam, okay? So that's just kind of simplifying it. Well, Islamic banks have been formed throughout the Middle East, including in Turkey, that say we operate based on profit sharing, meaning we lend, and if there is profit, that profit is shared, some of it is given to the bank, okay? Maybe it's similar to the interest, but if you don't make profit, you're not going to be penalized for that. So we share, all of us, everybody who uses this bank, the profit, but also we suffer the losses when we have losses. So that's the general concept. Because of some nations that are more Islamic, they have been practicing it, they have had many banks like this. In Turkey, we had few up until 2001, 2002, maybe 3 or 4. I'm not sure of the numbers. However, since 2002, during Prime Minister Erdogan's administration, that number has increased by 6-fold, okay? Now we have many banks in Turkey that are considered Islamic banks, and they have become very popular among businessmen, among the public, among people. A lot of them, they put their savings there. A lot of businessmen, they use these banks. And that has been pissing off, again, excuse my language, the IMF and also the major financial institutions, Citibank, etc. You can just make a list out of those major financial institutions. They find it threatening, and they find it something that is contrary to the Western notion of how banking is supposed to be. So he has been attacked a lot on this. And again, I talked with some people within the financial institutions who are anti-Prime Minister Erdogan, and they said this is absolutely outrageous. By doing that, he is alienating a lot of foreign investments from the Western countries. He's alienating the IMF. Well, in the parenthesis, good for you. Please alienate the IMF. He's alienating major, financial institutions, and some of them are retaliating. So that has an effect in our stock market and etc. and blah blah. And I have spoken with people. One particular person is a textile mogul, very successful businessman, worth tens of millions of dollars. And he said, you know what? I have always been a believer of, not interest rates not being a good thing. You don't deal with interest. So during all my business years, whenever I had extra money, I never put it in the bank. I invested it in land or some housing that I rented, because I didn't want to deal with that dirty money, because I'm a believer. I believe in this notion. Now I have the opportunity to actually use these banks because I am using them. And when I make profit, they make profit. Okay. And when they make profit, I make profit, and it works out very good for me. And I applaud this move. So again, you have two sides of the story, but also some of these financial experts were saying it also decreases this notion of Islamic banking, the government's influence of how much they can play with the interest rates. You know how we are doing it here with the Federal Reserve. You're the guru. You're the expert, James. I'm not. I'm like a student. I'm still learning. But they can't. When the bank operates that way, what government comes and dictates, then doesn't matter in terms of we're going to switch this, we're going to lower it, we're going to increase it, and in a way that is not for big government, pro-government. Yet he has again taken on this approach, and despite the prediction that was going to cause a lot of damage for Turkey, foreign investment in Turkey has increased tremendously. When Europe has been going through all these financial crises, going bankrupt, you have had a lot of countries, especially oil nations and things, bringing and putting their money in there, saying, well, this is one place to invest. And when we invest, we like to deal with these Islamic banks because they are investing in construction, roads, bridge, etc. And they have been getting a good profit out of that as well. This is one of the reasons while US has been, Europe has been going bankrupt, Turkey's economy has been floating fairly well. I'm not saying perfect, but relatively speaking, if we were to compare, let's say, Spain, Greece, to what has been happening economically speaking in Turkey. So then we have that. And again, taking on these big major enemies, the big financial institutions, all of them Western, making them enemies. Imagine what that's gonna do to you with the New York Times or Washington Post or Soros Institution, right? You're not gonna be a popular prime minister to talk about or write about. You're gonna be the bad, nasty enemy because you are the enemy of the big pharma. You are the big enemy of the big financial institutions. Again, that goes to the positive for Prime Minister Erdogan's camp. And of course, we have the international angle in this with the recent events, what's unfolding. And I tend to get emotional when I talk about, about Palestine and what has been happening there. For many people, it's an issue that now they have been paying attention. I have been paying attention to this since 1970s. When I lived in Iran, my father went to Palestine, and a lot of refugees came from Palestine that they were homeless, and they came to Iran, and they were my classmates. I know friends whose cousins and brothers were tortured and mutilated by the Israeli occupiers. So this is a topic that I feel very strong about. But as we know, and that has been in the U.S. media even, believe me or not, the Arab nations have been awfully quiet. All the neighboring countries have been awfully quiet. Well, it shouldn't come as any surprise because the heads of states, they are all our puppets. Can we name, let's say, more than 2 or 3 in the region that hasn't been installed by us? Let's go through Tunisia, installed by us, check mark. Egypt, we took care of that, installed by us, check mark. Saudi Arabia, they've been always our little puppets, and Israel's buddies, so check mark. So that's not really surprising for us who've been paying attention. But in the region, the only country that has been outside Iran has been speaking up on these issues very strongly without sugarcoating it, without making it mild, has been, again, Prime Minister Erdogan. And that maybe you will show some of the clips from the newspaper articles, the way the Western media approached this because of his strong stand, Prime Minister Erdogan's, against these genocidal practices in that region, in Gaza. He is being attacked as a leader who is now isolating the world leaders, including his Arab neighbors, because they are looking at him saying, "You jerk, now you make us look like a jerk," because think about it. I mean, if you're in Saudi Arabia, if you're among the people, okay, and you see how horrendous and awful this is, here are your leaders, the puppets who are ruling you. Your rulers are sitting there using some whitewashed language on the genocidal practices over there. And here is Turkey, quarter Europe, not even considered an Arab nation. And you have a leader there, a prime minister, who's saying, you know what, this award that you gave me, Israelis and the US, take it back. I don't want this dirty award. Shove it. I mean, I want to hear about examples of world leaders who have engaged in this kind of stand when it comes to the occupiers there. And I say occupiers. Some people say, how come you're not talking or writing about Israel? Well, one of the reasons I don't is I don't like to use Israel as a word for nation. I mean, personally, I do not recognize a nation, a legal nation that is called Israel. They've always been the occupiers, regardless of how they were recognized. The United States was the first nation to recognize the illegal occupation called Israel. Well, for me, I haven't recognized it. I am nationless. Basically, I am me. And so I don't know a country like that. I know Palestine, I know Palestinians, and I know the occupiers. And that's how it is for me. So I don't keep saying Israel. I don't like to even use the word. And some people may take an offense. And again, that doesn't bother me because that's one of the reason I like the position I'm in. I don't have to worry about who likes me or who doesn't like me. Nobody can affect my career or my livelihood or my funding of some sort of an organization. I don't have any of those stuff. So I don't think, and plus, I'm never covered by the mainstream media. So I'm not going to cut any bridges or lose any bridges or destroy any. So I state my opinion. In case some people may wonder, say, Sibel Edmonds may be biased towards the occupiers there by saying this is a good move by Erdogan. Well, that's true. Maybe some people would consider me biased because I've always had this stand. That's my belief. That's my personal belief of the occupiers in Palestine. And if Americans, people in the Western world, but let's talk about Americans here. If they believe it doesn't matter, they went there, they were recognized, that's the end of it, because thousands or 3,000 years ago, they called it their land, then we should also evacuate the United States and really give the land back to people who occupied this place before us, okay? We can't have it both ways. But Prime Minister Erdogan has been very strong on this issue of the violations, the genocidal practices over there. And he has, again, made big enemies, not within the Western world, but also within the Eastern world. We have many Arab rulers who are absolutely agitated because when you have someone in this position, being a prime minister of a country, talk like this openly, Obama coming and saying, in case of these genocidal practices, saying, well, we regret that these civilians are being killed. We hope they will curb this. Then you compare those statements made by Obama to the statement made by Obama and Bush towards Assad being engaged in genocidal, awful, evil moves. And it's the world's responsibility to go and bomb the hell out of them. And then, well, what's the difference? Look at the numbers. Look at the pictures. There's a big difference today. We have this medium called internet. I was exposed to these facts when I was 7, 8 years old in Iran because I was on the other side. People here, they were not. When I met my husband 24 years ago, when we were talking, he had never seen these types of pictures in New York Times that he followed or Washington Post. So the only thing he saw was on the front page, they had, an Israeli mother who lost his child or her child. And I feel horrible for anybody who loses their child, including her. Big picture, huge caption, front page. And once in a while on page B12, they would say that 165 children were burned to death. Well, he never got to the page B65. So he used to sit down and argue with me saying, well, maybe you're biased because you grew up in those countries and you saw those. We have been seeing what has been done to the Jewish population there, correct? And now, in the last 8-10 years, seeing the pictures from the other sources now available that were not available to him, to my husband, he is on my side. Because I used to have arguments with him over this issue. And then we decided to never talk about it because we were not going to stay married if we did. We don't have that problem. Well, today we have people seeing these atrocities. And actually, that's positive. Everything else is horrendous. It's awful. But again, I really applaud Prime Minister Erdogan for these moves, including the big pharma, his stand. And I don't want to sound like somebody who is coming here and saying he's an angel, he's great, I love him, go vote for him. But what I want to tell people, first, the people in Turkey is, we've never had any prime minister doing things like that for the public. We have had a lot of corrupt people, all of them, okay, with tremendous level of corruption. We have had all of them engage in human rights violations, okay? And yet we have never had ones who had done moves that even come close to this. So while Turkey is disagreeing with the prime minister on the real negative things, and he has many, okay, they need to stand by him on these positive, extraordinary positions and practices that no world leader has had the courage to do. Many Turks are nationalists, they're like, yeah, especially Turkish man saying, I've got big ones. Well, this guy has got big ones, okay? I mean, if you want to think about the Turkish pride business, the nationalism, I don't subscribe to those kinds of notions. Think about it. You really have a brave, courageous, strong Turkish prime minister that you've never had. Here he is. Now, fight all his negatives with him, okay? As much as possible, out there, vocal, but support these good stuff. Because if he is destroyed, if he's taken out, because that's what they want to do. That's what the big powers want to do. The big pharma and the military-industrial complex and the financial institutions, they want this prime minister out. They don't want him to be a president, right? He's taken out by those powers. You are losers in Turkey, okay? We are losers in the world too, because I want people to know that our leaders, I don't even like the word leaders, there are people in these positions, they can do things, okay? It's not impossible. It's not difficult. You just do it. You just say it's illegal to give kickback to doctors, okay? Illegal. Declare it. You have this opportunity. Please support these moves. Please support these actions. Not necessarily personally supporting Prime Minister Erdogan, okay? But support these types of actions because the beneficiaries is the public. Think about it. What kind of advantage, what kind of profit Prime Minister Erdogan is going to have by pissing off the big pharmas, okay? No money is going to come to him from big pharma. I can't think of a single benefit to Prime Minister Erdogan for doing this. The only thing I see is the benefit of the public, the benefit to the public, for the public. So please support these practices. And please, for the rest of us, if we have other bloggers and the independent journalists who are watching this, write about this. We can send you the links to some of the articles in English published in Turkey about these laws that are for the public's good. And let's talk about the fact that it's doable. We can do it. If they're doing it there, why can't we do it everywhere for horrifying practices like that? And I'm going to let you ask a question. We started with one question, and I've been talking nonstop for about 40 minutes again.
Well, it's been a tour de force there. So just to recap for everyone, he's pissed off the big pharma lobby by trying to by stopping the kickbacks to doctors and all the various benefits and perks. He's pissed off the financial institutions by increasing and promoting Islamic banking, and which is now taking off in Turkey, with Islamic banks currently holding something like $36 billion in assets, and by 2017 estimated somewhere between $80 and $120 billion in assets, so it is exploding right now. And thirdly, he's pissed off the Zionists by speaking out against the Israeli occupation of Gaza and what's going on there right now. Those are some pretty powerful enemies, as you say, and as you say, it's difficult to see what benefit he is going to get out of this. Certainly, we can understand how a regular prime minister, just by maintaining the status quo, wins all around. He gets to keep all of his friends in Big Pharma and the powerful lobbies who will keep him in power. The public doesn't know any different because they've never seen anyone act any different, so they don't really care. He manages to maintain his power, and certainly aggrandize himself and his wealth while he does so. So it's obvious why most politicians go along with the status quo. It's head-scratching. It's great, but it's head-scratching when a prime minister like Erdogan comes along and actually goes against them, especially after having been that serviceable puppet in the past. It's quite a turnaround that's going on. The only thing that I can think of in this regards, in terms of a benefit for it, is this a political play for him? Does he believe that by doing these things, he's going to win the support of the public, at least, or more of the support of the public, in order to continue his prime ministership? I mean, is this an election gambit, or is there something deeper going on?
Well, if you look at the practice, let's say with the Islamic banks, that has been in effect since 2002, and he has remained popular. So it's been going on for now 12 years. The move against the big pharma and these horrifying, terrible practices, kickbacks, that was done in 2011. That's 3 years ago. And interestingly, one of his big enemies who has had a fallout with him, that Imam Mullah Fethullah Gulen, who is sitting in Pennsylvania, the CIA man we've been talking about, his main newspaper, who has been attacking Erdogan for the past year and a half, nonstop, Zaman. If you see one of the articles I sent to you was written by Zaman and promoted as how great he was in 2011. That was before the fallout. That was before they declared Erdogan his enemy, because CIA told Gulen saying, we don't like what this guy is doing, okay? So these are not recent moves, because we know that he's been suffering with some of the scandals, and I believe they were true. I don't believe those tapes were made-up tapes. I believe the people who recorded those corruption-related conversations, those people were among those sponsored by the big powers, the CIA, the big pharma, the military-industrial complex. But I don't dispute that they were authentic. It happened, and nothing would whitewash that. So that aside, you know, he hasn't been doing any of this stuff recently since those scandals and these Gezi Park protests. All those things are only a year and a half, 2 years old. These moves that we just talked about, they have been going on for years and years, and the pharmaceutical was 2011. So the answer is no. But does he hope that the Turkish people would think within their own conscience and say, first, let's look at the alternatives there, people who are going to run against him for these presidential elections. Let's look back in the history and then say, these things that he has done, have they been for our good, for our benefit, with no perceived advantage financially, I would say even internationally, because look at the number of enemies he created. This equals committing suicide. In fact, some people that I talked with who consider themselves knowledgeable and knowing things from the inside, I don't know how knowledgeable they are, they said if he wins the presidential elections, the next thing is going to be, they're going to take him out. There's going to be an assassination, okay? They're going to assassinate Erdogan, especially if he becomes the president, because all the other things failed. You know, leaking the tapes, all the newspaper campaigns, all the campaigns by the lobby, the military-industrial complex, everything to this point has failed. So the only option that leaves those enemies is take him out by assassination. So if Turkish people were to think and say, do we want to really isolate this guy and say, go hang by yourself? Because if a nation does that, I don't care which nation it is, Turkey, Afghanistan, US, wherever. If people do that, I think then I would say the people, that kind of people deserve all the corruption and the horrendous things that happens to them. So if they are thinking, and a lot of people that I spoke with, I would say 65, 70% of them, especially those from the workers group, these are the construction workers, they were pro Erdogan and they were saying he's been good to them, okay, or his practices or his administration being good to them. I'm not saying person Erdogan, they've been happy. The majority of the people I talk who were really strongly against, Erdogan, Prime Minister Erdogan, anti-Prime Minister Erdogan, they were the wealthy people who like gray area businesses and operations, okay? And again, in Turkey, it's a very common theme. You see that a lot. People, they don't like to illustrate, they like to go this way. And they have money and advantages at stake with Erdogan's policies. So, and they happen to be rich, high society, what they call elite, not intellectually elite. A lot of them are just nothing upstairs there, but their jewelry, out of touch with what Turkey is about. This is like they are their own class, okay? You see them in Turkey, we call them high society. They just pose for paparazzi. And nobody knows where their money came from. There is no business, really, no career, but they're rich, either through inheritance, through parents who've been corrupt. You see those people speaking up. And then you see some people who are in the middle, who are obviously being influenced by what they are reading. Because if you read all those publications, sponsored, written, produced by the military-industrial complex-related institutions, or Fethullah Gulen, CIA's Fethullah Gulen, his publication Zaman in Turkey. But everything we have in publication in the US has been anti-Erdogan. To this date, I have not, in the past 1.5 years, I haven't read a single article talking about anything positive about the guy. He's been the pure evil. He's almost been placed in the same category as Bush's axis of evil. North Korea, Iraq, Iran. I think now the axis has 4. One of them has been Erdogan for the past 1.5 years. They're influenced and they're afraid. They are saying he is going to make us Islamic. And I want to give a very quick example of this, okay? One high society, rich, ultra-secularist family, husband and wife with kids, they were telling me that they are outraged how he's gonna ban alcohol in Turkey, because one of the first moves as a warm up to that he's doing, he put a legal age for alcohol 18. And now he's enforcing, it was there, the law, but it was never enforced by the law enforcement, that if you go, even with your kid as parents, to a bar or a restaurant, and you as parents order your kid beer or wine or whiskey, okay, they can override you as parents and say, we can't, he's or she is not 18. You see that's Sharia law. I said, woohoo. We have had Sharia law in US for a long time, plus ours starts at the age 21. Well, what they do is they interpret this kind of policy that is being enforced as a sign of Prime Minister Erdogan bringing Sharia law. Well, do we have Sharia law in the United States? Because they said, well, how about as parents, I'm a very modern person, mother or father, and I want to say, it's okay, I want my son to drink the wine in this bar. They're saying, no, I don't have that right. I said, well, in the United States, our Sharia law is 21. Not only that, they will call and report you to this fascist organization called CPS, Child Protective Services. They will drive there, they will arrest the parents, they will take the kid away from them, put them in a foster home, and then they have to go and hire an attorney and fight for years in court trying to get their child back for that practice. We haven't had that in Turkey. You haven't had that. So I said, if it is a Sharia law, if it's a Sharia practice, then we have been practicing something far beyond Sharia in the United States. But this is just a small example of this paranoia and panic, because the mainstream media circulates it. Sharia law, he's Islamist, he's going to take Turkey into the Mullah Ayatollah Khomeini's era. He's going to make women cover up their heads and all those things. But when you ask them to give you example, and they give you these example, you kind of shake your head and say, this is more like a panic kind of a thing, public panic artificially created, that you see, but not any signs of Sharia law. In fact, one may argue that the laws we had in place with the military coup and even with some under Ataturk to say it's illegal for Turkish women to wear hijab to schools or workplace. Look, in the United States, Muslim women can go to universities and work and wear their saris. They can wear their veils and their scarves, okay? Turkey is 97% Muslim country. So when the government enforces a law that says we make it illegal for you to wear it, to have a choice to wear it, well, I wonder what is really fascistic here. I mean, when you think of it under those terms, you say all he did was saying now they are allowed, if they want to wear it, they can wear it. What we had before was wrong for any nation, not only for Turkey. Okay, people should dress the way they want to dress. He removed the dress code. He did not put in place a dress code. He says people should be free to wear their hijabs. The governments before, the militaries before, they said it is illegal for the Turkish women to wear hijabs. Well, that is a dress code. And again, some people, because of the propaganda, they can't distinguish between the two. One is removing the code, not bringing the code in there. And again, that goes back to public education and why it's important for people to access alternative media and engage in critical thinking.
Well, sadly, I think that we all know how that works with the propaganda media, and we've seen that so many times. It's like when the propaganda media freaks out about the homophobic tendencies of the Russian government, but somehow overlooks all of the U.S. allies that put homosexuals to death. That's fine, but the alleged right. Russian government abuses are just over the top. Yeah. So there's a lot going on here, and I guess the question ultimately becomes that you talked about how there is a positive and a negative side to the ledger when you're looking at Erdogan. He's not an angel, descended from heaven to rule benevolently
yes,
over
absolutely.
everyone, but he has made these positive steps, and we do need to support those positive steps as an example, if nothing else, for example, for the rest of the world of what is possible in standing up to the bankers and the pharmaceutical companies and the Zionists, etc. But that does raise the question, how do we support those positive policies and not support the negative ones? Do you believe that the Turkish people should re-elect Erdogan and then continue protesting him, or how does that work?
Oh God, that is that's a tough question, because you know how I feel about voting and the system. I don't vote. I'm like, I don't engage in the game they set up for me here in the United States. And I'm not going to cast any vote, because even though I have my citizenship still in Turkey, I have my Turkish passport, I'm not going to, I'm not going to vote. I can vote, but I'm not. So I don't want to come across as someone who's advocating. If I were living in Turkey, and if voting was compulsory, okay, like it is in Australia, you have to vote, otherwise you're going to go to jail. I consider that horrifying. And Australians, when I was there last year, they were arguing with me saying, Americans would participate in their politics, you Americans, far more if they made it compulsory like our nation. And I'm like, oh, God. Anyhow, if it were compulsory, if I were living in Turkey, if I had to vote, they put a gun and say, you have to vote, you have to pick somebody, I would put down his name. First of all, there's no one out there that even comes close to viable, okay? That's for voting. So if people say, what is your advice? I would say that would be if under those circumstances. However, I haven't researched. I'm sure, I'm assuming, but I'm pretty sure in my assumption that this is not only Erdogan. There are other people within Prime Minister Erdogan's administration, obviously, who have been good. One person single-handedly can't come and say, I'm going to put this law and enforce. You have to have enforcers. You have to push the Turkish parliament on this, etc. Meaning there are some good people there, okay? I don't know who they are within Prime Minister Erdogan's administration. Let's find out. And for me too, I want to find out who these people are behind the scene. Maybe they are not so much behind the scene. Maybe I didn't have enough time with my Turkish sources, but maybe they are, some of them, they're public faces. Let's look at those people too. Wouldn't it be great to have those goods in one person without some of those corruption scandals, etc.? Well, of course, absolutely. Let's find out about those too. But he goes, that means his administration will go, meaning some of these good people, which are so rare, because I've never come across real good people in the politics. Really, I haven't. Those are going to go, and we have lost this tremendous opportunity. I believe Turkey being successful in implementing these incredible brave laws, okay, pharmaceutical, etc., with the banking, that eventually has a way of spreading around, because you're going to looking at some other nations, maybe first neighboring countries, who say, why can't we have people who can do things like that here? And then people in the first world countries to say, we really are in bad shape. I mean, if it's being done in these nations, why in the world, supposedly we have these great democracies, we are the great democratized Western world, why aren't we searching to have people within our political system who actually work for the people? I mean, Obama works for the insurance companies and the pharma and the military industrial complex. The guy before him, they would never dare, even for political gesture, they would say, we need to little bit tweak here and there some of those laws and maybe put some amendments to those laws that make it maybe a little bit, or give the illusion of, blah, blah, with cutting the kickbacks. Maybe we make it, they always talk like that. Why don't you say it's illegal? It has to be outlaw. Very simple, and then do it. So that gives us hope here in the US, people in the UK, all over the Western world. We have been the victims of the big pharmas that have the strings to their puppets who happen to be our leaders. So this may say that it's possible. At least it raises the possibility that once in a while, there pops up a person, a man or a woman, who has the guts to do this, even at the risk of being assassinated. Do you think he doesn't know, Prime Minister Erdogan, that he's on the list to be assassinated, most likely? Of course. People say, in the United States, they say there are a lot of good things, especially during the first couple of years of Obama. There are a lot of good things that he wants to do. But, he knows, just like Kennedy, he will be assassinated, by the CIA. This is why he's not doing what he really wants to do. Okay, well, true or not true. Okay, I'm not going to say they're all wrong about this. He is what he is. He's doing what he's been doing, meaning this whole notion of public servant, you are there to serve the people's interest, is not there. If it's your life interest, remaining alive, becoming rich, have $1 billion book deals, etc., then you are not there, the public servants. In this case, in Turkey, we are a little bit, actually greatly, seeing the notion of public servants. He's doing it for the benefit of people. And, I don't know. I used to, when I was 9-10 years, I used to read Zapata. We believed in these people who would come, with their sword and say, I'm going to do something for the people. Well, here's Erdogan there with his sword, and he hasn't been backing off. He's been going, so let's support him. And let's support the awareness and help the awareness in the other countries, including US, of people perceiving something totally different happening in Turkey. And then let's say, how can we do things like that? Turkey is doing it. I think we should be doing the similar kinds of things and practice these kinds of nice stuff for a change.
There you go. I mean, as you say, it's not rocket science here. I mean, it's quite simple. Just make it illegal, and it can be done, and it has been done in Turkey. So, again, very interesting developments. I guess just finally, again, for people who don't really know about the system, so the first round of voting will be on the 10th of August, and if there is no simple majority, there will be a second round of voting on August 24th. What is the sense on the ground right now? Is Erdogan ahead in the polls, or do we know?
If he stays alive and if there is no major rigging or anything, the statistics show that he has it. I mean, it's like slam dunk situation. Okay. And of course it would hurt for more people, of course, who thought maybe they wouldn't vote, etc., to maybe say, I will go and support. So that is given as far as everything, even in the Western media, even those anti-Erdogans, they're saying it's a slam dunk. It's going to happen because people are happy. I mean, for anybody who keeps using democracy and wanting to export democracy as an excuse, U.S. should be the first one to applaud and say, whew, finally we have democracy on the grounds. It's just that they don't like the democracy when it's not their puppet. It's like there's a conditional democracy. They keep asking for the United States. This is democracy. The worker class, people in the villages, maybe not in the fancy areas in Istanbul, they want this man. They want the prime minister. They've been happy. They've been happy. There are people that are saying this is never has happened in Turkey. It's the first time we are seeing this happening. I mean, I heard a taxi driver said, you know what? I don't care. Steal $10-20 million, do some good for public. We had all these leaders who stole hundreds of millions of dollars, didn't do a single good for public. Very simple way of thinking, not a very correct way of thinking. But you have the workers class who are not elite and highly educated. They are just telling you in plain, simple language, I like it. I've never had it in my country. I want to keep it while I can. Okay? So they want him. The question is, what's going to happen afterwards once he becomes the president? They are trying to shifting certain things around to give more power to the presidents, because in Turkey presidents have been mainly symbolic figures. It's the prime minister. So we can change the constitution. Let's turn it this way. Now we say it goes this way, not that way. There is a talk that may happen. And as I said, it's the practices and the people with Erdogan within the administration who have made these good things happen. So I guess there should be encouragement and push, at least by the public, applaud, loud enough. Hopefully some people will hear even outside Turkey to say, let's continue this policy. Let's not back off. I don't know how they're going to pressure him. If they haven't been able to, if they haven't succeeded, meaning the US, the CIA, the military-industrial complex, to have him stop doing these things and to back off up to this point, I don't know how they're going to succeed afterwards. So, and also it shows with Prime Minister Erdogan, he has been vindicated. He's able to look at these people who've been trying to knock him down and say, guess what? Despite all the hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, or all your propaganda media, look, I'm still standing because the public, their vote of confidence is with me. Okay, that is incredible. That I've never seen anything like this. I just keep thinking, I'm asking people, I haven't seen anything like this, and I hope it will show that it can be done. And I hope it won't end up with something dramatic and awful happening. But people have won so far. At least let me put it this way. Some people say the notion of having majority rule is a horrible thing, because what about the minority? The majority of people in Turkey, they are happy. They like him. They want him. They are supporting him. And that's the fact. And personally, as someone outside Turkey, I'm looking and I say kudos. I mean, I don't know what to say. If my father were alive today, he would be applauding these practices. He wouldn't have applauded him as a person. He would have applauded these practices. And let's applaud these practices.
All right. Well, as early as next week, we might be referring to President-elect Erdogan, and maybe a couple of weeks from now, the assassinated President-elect Erdogan. No, well, we'll see, again, how this turns out. Again, very interesting. I hope people are keeping an eye on it, even with all of the other things happening in the world right now. So, of course, we will continue to cover this as the developments continue to occur. So, Sibel Edmonds, BoilingFrogsPost.com, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, James.
This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com.